Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Mary Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, Barry. I'm Patricia Raskin, and I am the co-host of this wonderful podcast that Barry Weinhold has created called Finding Hope, the End to Suffering.
Thank you.
Barry.
Hi, Patricia. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to be with you again. And when we left off last week, we were talking to Mary Odgers about her amazing journey and her book. Her book is 6 Funerals and a Wedding, which sheds light on the complexity of a story of family with all of its joys and bumps and moments of regrets, and really helps people understand suffering and how you can come through it and how you can help so many people, which is what she does as not only a nurse, but as a life coach. So happy to have Mary.
I read her book. I started reading it. I thought, well, I'll just read a little and then I'll get back to it later. I couldn't put it down. It was so good. And so I sat and read practically the whole thing in one sitting, just because I was so waiting for the next thing for you to write about. And so
I'm happy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So Mary, I mean, you've been through, so many things. I'm just going to read this part of it because this is pretty amazing. I mean, you take your readers into the lives of those that you've loved, including your husband who took his own life, your sons, one of whom you lost to suicide just 8 weeks after your husband's death, your mother, a strong-willed military wife who had obediently birthed and raised 6 children while silently harboring a dark secret from her childhood. And then, of course, there's a fire also that happened in your life. So it's an amazing story. And I think I just want to say to Barry, what touched me is that there isn't anger, there isn't bitterness, there isn't jadedness.
Right.
There's this happened and it was really hard, and here's how I got through it, and here's how I'm moving on.
And sometimes people get into victim consciousness and they get stuck there. And yes, times I know, and experiencing a loss of a loved one, as I have done, sometimes you feel like a victim. Why did this happen to me? You know, is God punishing me or something? And so, but if you don't want to stay stuck there, and Mary didn't, and neither did I, of course. But I think it's a temptation that people have sometimes to just wallow in the self-pity that comes out of all that. And Mary, you're a great example of somebody who didn't do that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. What precipitated you to write the book, Mary? I mean, and tell all of this, because, when you share all this, you have to bring it all up again. It comes all up again, and that's hard. So what prompted you to write the book?
Well, I think I'd like to, before I tell you that, I'd like to say that being a victim has its advantages, and that is you get to have people's undivided attention and their love and their caring and their wishing you well. And that's like a warm blanket around your shoulders, but it doesn't take you anywhere. You never progress through what happened to you. You do get love, but it's temporary.
Right.
But do you think that that's important for a little while? Do you think that's a part of the process?
Definitely.
Definitely. I do. And I think anybody who has been through something, it's almost like medicine to have someone send a card or someone to say, I just don't know how you do it. And you can think, oh, okay, that feels good. But there comes a point where I knew what it was like to be happy. And in the introduction, you said I was born seeing life through the lens of optimism. Well, I really thank my parents for that and their DNA. And I did. I kind of always saw the bright side, and I was nowhere near thinking I would ever see it again after the few things happened that happened. And I really wanted to be happy. I wanted to be joyful. I wanted to laugh. The first time I laughed after my husband passed away, it sounded like it sounded foreign. I felt like, oh my gosh, I haven't felt that, nor had I heard myself laugh. And I knew that I wanted to move forward, but there was nothing in my world that was telling me how to do it. And I guess I started realizing when I verbalized things to close friends, it was shrouded in a little optimism, but the responses I got from them were, Mary, you've got to share this with people. You've got to share this. You should come and speak at my church, or things like that. And then I was searching. I laugh and say, I took everybody's recommendation as to what I needed to do to feel better. I talked to therapists, psychiatrists. I went to workshops. You name it, I tried it. And I believe every little bit helped. But through all those events, to try and get myself, my head right about it, if you will, I took notes about what helped, what didn't. I journaled all the time. And I kept thinking, it's just having faith that something will resonate. And it's been 12 years since we lost my husband and my sons died. And I guess 13 since we lost the house. And I still feel just about everything I do around this, including coaching clients with grief coaching, I get a little bit better myself.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going for. And Barry, you said that with your own experience, you wanted to use that for a purpose. And I did too. I thought this will be my purpose, to say to other people, if you stick with it, it really helps. I've said before, I was an extraordinarily ordinary woman with a husband and children that I loved. And I was very happy with all of that. I wasn't a star or anybody with any notoriety. And I thought a book and getting the word out of how I did find happiness again. And the pain is always there. I think it's important for people to know that the pain is always there, but how you handle it and how you see it, how you perceive what happened, that becomes easier to carry.
Yeah. Well, the book is wonderful. And since people haven't read the book, why don't you tell us about all the things that happened to you that caused you so much pain and suffering that you write about in the book? Let's start with that.
Okay. And it'll go along the line of the book. The book's written in vignettes, which are complete stories, each one. And it starts off with being in my home in Ramona, California. We lived on 9 acres, and the Santa Ana winds blew regularly. And after living there for 15 years, the winds blew and a fire started, and the house burned. And that's a picture of the house before, obviously. And then that was it. Overnight, we drove away at about midnight, and by 6 o'clock in the morning, we got a call saying that the house had burned. That's my husband and my son and I just looking through the rubble. It was shocking, just absolutely shocking that it could all be over with. And then a year later, my husband on the left side of that picture, he had a lot of depression around that, but also, kind of leaned in that direction. And he left the house to run errands, is what he said. And he committed suicide. And then about 6 weeks later, my father, who had become a quadriplegia due to a car accident, died. And a week later, my son committed suicide.
I have a question about that, Mary. what do you advise people? And Barry, of course, your expertise is so important here. For you as a family member to be able to separate that from them and from you when it's so close to home, when someone takes their life?
Well, how do I separate it?
How do you separate it so that it doesn't become you, and that you don't take it on as something that happened to you, or that you caused it or you created it?
Yeah.
I think that's the question.
And interestingly enough, and maybe you just know this, that was the first step. I thought I was the mother. I was the wife. I calmed things. I created things. I set a direction for our family. And this happened. It was difficult not to replay everything in my head that I could have done differently. And why didn't I do it? And was I patient enough? And all this was mostly directed at my husband, because a husband-wife relationship is different than a mother-child. And with my son, somehow I knew I knew I had done everything I could. But with my husband, I just couldn't make him better and couldn't help him along. It was too late before he started really getting real with me about what he was going through. And I had a therapist, Dr. Weiss Wisdom was her name, and she said, Mary, you are not powerful enough to have caused this. You are not. And it was like a light went on.
Yeah.
And I still experienced it at times, but I have to mention that I believe in the bigger picture. I believe in the universe.
Yeah. Barry, I want to ask you your comment about this in terms of not just Mary, but anybody who loses someone to suicide who's so close to them. Talk about that and how they get through it.
Well, there's a couple things to, first of all, to understand that grief, almost like death, is a process. If you find out that you're going to die, you go through this process. First of all, it's denial, and there's anger, and there's all there's 5 stages ending up with acceptance. The same is true with grief. You have to go through all of those stages to get out through the other side of it, and it takes a while. It takes, depending, and particularly takes longer, I've found, if you are experiencing a sudden death of a loved one. It's a little bit easier if you know someone's going to die and you kind of prepare yourself for the inevitable. But when there's a sudden death, there's no time to prepare. You have to pick yourself up from where you are, and that is difficult. And then the other thing that I've noticed, and I noticed it with myself, when my wife died in a skiing accident, I had it was a second marriage for her and me, and I had 2 kids and she had 5. Well, there's 7 kids to take care of in terms of grief, as well as she was also a therapist. So she had her clients. I had to console some of them, and I had all of her friends, and so I spent an awful lot of time taking care of others during the process, and not taking care of myself at first. And it finally caught up with me, and I had to just take time off, and I went to the desert and spent 8 weeks in Mesa, Arizona with some friends, and to kind of get my bearings again, and take better care of myself, and let other people handle their own grief. But at first I got consumed by all the people around me that were grieving, and as a therapist, my therapist part just jumped in and wanted to help.
Right.
And that can be a danger for anybody who has a loss.
Well, Mary, your comments about that.
Well, in comparing my situation, I didn't have 7. I had 2 grown sons.
Yeah.
But it left me feeling so helpless and so scared, because it was an overnight event. There weren't any attempts beforehand. There weren't any signs that I ever picked up on.
Right.
And that part of it I felt was just my pain that I carried, and I couldn't force anything. And it was hard for me to know the right thing to do. But I think I definitely know all my efforts were noticed, and it was many years before their grief was really resolved in a way that allowed them to be more productive. Was depression, and there was just a lot of difficulty for both of them in different ways. And I kept telling them, the three of us are a strong family, and we're here for each other. And yeah, it's very painful to think of what they went through.
Yeah.
Do you think that your family in some way has bonded more or gotten stronger through this experience?
Well, I definitely do. And my two sons, David and Matthew, are loving, decent men. And they communicate with me well, but not on deep subjects. And I'm very, satisfied, but I'm starting to hear their impression of us the last 12 or 13 years, that I was their rock, that I'd always, and I thought, I hoped it made I wasn't really feeling like a winner in the family situation, losing my husband and my son. And the little bit of feedback that I get from them that's so loving and so sincere, it speaks a lot to me and how I view myself in all of this. Because it was going to be a waste of time being down on myself. But I'll tell you, it's a constant, I won't say a battle, but it's a constant thing I know I will do forever, is just exploring how to make sure things are steady, and that my thinking is productive, my actions are productive. And I have to say, it's worked for me. It can work for anybody. The right thoughts, right guidance, making up your mind.
Right. It sounds like what you're saying is always moving forward. You may move forward, move a step back, but you're always looking forward. Right. So that makes a big difference.
Right.
It makes a big difference. Yeah. Barry, I mean, you've counseled thousands of people and written, 77 books. But I think Mary's story, and we're going to close on this and then move into the next segment for next week. But her story is remarkable because of all of the loss that happened so quickly, as you said, just so quickly, and just be able to I don't know, even just be able to handle it, to get it inside of your system. Sometimes you just go numb, right? You just kind of blank out because it's too much to handle. But but Mary didn't do that.
Well, she did probably some of that, but she was able to pull herself through with help of friends and her faith and everything else. I mean, I think when you're in that kind of situation, I always say you don't want to leave any of your troops at home. You want to use every resource you have to help you. And I think that's important for anyone who's experiencing a loss, is take help wherever it's available and make sure that, and I think in the crawler, we talk about how if you feel yourself in a loss, or you're experiencing a loss, or you're experiencing depression, please reach out to somebody and help and talk to somebody, because often you get yourself in a downward spiral in thinking, and just to talk to someone about all that can help reverse that.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. And we're going to close. We're going to come back next week. Mary's book is 6 Funerals and a Wedding, and you can certainly check that out. It's Mary Odgers, Odgers. She's a writer. She's a registered nurse of 22 years. She's a life coach, and she also has a master grief coach certification. So she's really there to help people, and she understands so much because she's been through it. So again, thank you. And Barry, thank you. And we'll be back next week. I'm Patricia Raskin, the co-host with Barry Weinhold, who created this incredible podcast series called Finding Hope, The End to Suffering.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope: The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.